Chief Thompson dismissed the homeless boy's offer with cruel laughter. "I don't need charity from street rats," she snapped. But when Tommy mentioned his father was a cop who died being a hero, her world stopped. The Martinez surname, the familiar eyes, the stubborn determination. This was Carlos's son, and she'd failed him completely. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave your city in the comments as well. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of the modest ranch house on Elm Street, where Margaret Iron Lady Thompson sat trapped in her wheelchair, staring at the overgrown garden that had once been her pride and joy. At 58, the former police chief had commanded respect from every officer in the Metropolitan Police Department for 35 years. Now, 3 years after the accident that had stolen her legs and her purpose, she commanded nothing but bitter solitude. The doorbell rang, interrupting her daily ritual of cataloging everything she'd lost. Margaret wheeled herself to the front door, irritated by the interruption. Through the peephole, she saw a small figure hunched against the rain, a boy, maybe 12 years old, with dark hair plastered to his head and clothes that hung loose on his thin frame. She opened the door just wide enough to speak through the chain. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." The boy looked up, revealing dark eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Despite the rain and obvious hunger, he stood with a dignity that reminded Margaret of something she couldn't quite place. "I'm not selling anything, ma'am," Tommy Martinez said, his voice steady despite the cold. "I noticed your garden needs work. I could help clean it up. Maybe fix that broken fence. I'm good with my hands." Margaret's laugh was sharp and bitter. "And what do you want in return? Money? I'm not some charity case." Tommy shifted his weight, rain dripping from his worn sneakers. "Just, if you had any leftover food, ma'am. I haven't eaten since yesterday." The request hit Margaret like a physical blow. Here was a child, clearly homeless and hungry, offering to work for scraps. But instead of compassion, she felt only irritation at being confronted with someone else's problems when she could barely handle her own. "I don't need charity from street rats," she snapped, her voice cruel with the bitterness that had consumed her since the accident. "Find someone else to con." Tommy's shoulders straightened, and for a moment, his youthful face showed a flash of the same steel Margaret had once wielded as a badge of honor. "It's not charity, ma'am. It's work. My father taught me that if you need something, you earn it." His voice took on a quiet pride. "He was a cop, died being a hero." The words hit Margaret like electricity. Her hand froze on the door chain as the boy's face suddenly came into focus with stunning clarity. The dark eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he stood with dignity despite his circumstances. "What did you say your name was?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tommy Martinez," the boy replied, confusion flickering across his features at her sudden change. In tone, Margaret's world tilted on its axis. Martinez. Those eyes. That determined expression she'd seen 1,000 times before. Most vividly in the split second before Detective Carlos Martinez had pushed her out of the way of a gunman's bullet 3 years ago. This was Carlos's son, the boy she'd promised. Her dying partner, she would look after. The child. She'd failed completely. Margaret's hands trembled as she fumbled with the door chain. Carlos Martinez had died saving her life, and his final words had been about his son. "Take care of Tommy. Promise me." She'd been so consumed by her own trauma and rehabilitation that she'd forgotten the most important promise she'd ever made. Margaret opened the door fully, her wheelchair rolling back to allow Tommy inside. "Come in," she said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't hide. "You're soaked." Tommy hesitated, clearly surprised by her sudden change in demeanor. "Ma'am, I just need to know if you want help with your yard. I can come back when the rain stops." "No," Margaret said firmly, a note of her old authority creeping back into her voice. "Come inside now. We need to talk." As Tommy stepped into the warm house, Margaret studied his face more carefully. He was thinner than he should be, his clothes clean, but obviously secondhand, his shoes held together with duct tape, but his posture remained proud, his eyes alert and intelligent. "Tommy," Margaret began carefully, "tell me about your father." The boy's face lit up with a mixture of pride and pain. "Detective Carlos Martinez, badge number 1847. He worked downtown precinct for 15 years. Mom always said he was the best cop in the city." His expression darkened. "He died in the line of duty 3 years ago." Got shot protecting someone. Margaret's throat tightened. Do you remember who he was protecting? Tommy shook his head. Mom never told me the details. Said it was too painful. She just said he died being a hero and he always was. The weight of Tommy's words crashed over Margaret like a tidal wave. Carlos had died saving her life, and his son didn't even know the woman he was talking to was the reason his father was dead. Tommy, Margaret said slowly. Where's your mother now? The light in Tommy's eyes dimmed. She died 8 months ago. Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatments. After, he stopped, clearly struggling with emotions too big for his young shoulders. After what? Margaret prompted gently. After Dad's pension got tied up in paperwork. Mom said the department was reviewing his benefits. She kept calling, but they kept saying it would take time. Tommy's voice grew quiet. She died waiting. Margaret felt physically sick. Carlos's pension had been delayed by bureaucracy while his wife battled cancer and his son watched her die. The system had failed the family of a hero, and Margaret, as former chief, bore responsibility for that failure. Margaret's investigation over the next few hours revealed the full scope of the department's failure. Carlos's death benefits had been tied up for 3 years due to a clerical error. His widow had died unable to afford cancer treatment while bureaucrats shuffled papers. His son had been in foster care until aging out at 12, then living on the streets. Tommy, Margaret said carefully, where have you been living since your mother died? The boy's expression became guarded. Around. I get by okay. I'm smart. And I know how to stay safe. Dad taught me that. Margaret's heart broke a little more. This child, this brave, proud child had been surviving on the streets while she'd wallowed in self-pity in her comfortable house. Have you been to the police station? Asked for help? Tommy's laugh was bitter, an expression too cynical for his age. I tried. They said they couldn't help unless I had family to take me in. Said foster care was for younger kids, and I was difficult to place because of my age. Margaret felt rage building in her chest, not the bitter anger that had consumed her for 3 years, but the righteous fury that had once made her a legendary chief of police. Tommy, she said, her voice taking on the authority that had commanded an entire police force. Do you know who I am? The boy shook his head, clearly confused by her tone. Margaret wheeled herself to a bookshelf and pulled down a framed photo herself in dress uniform on the day she'd been promoted to chief, standing next to Detective Carlos Martinez at his commendation ceremony. Tommy's eyes widened as he recognized his father. That's my dad. But who are you? I'm Margaret Thompson. I was your father's chief. She paused, the words feeling like swallowing glass. I'm the person he died protecting. The silence that followed was deafening. Tommy stared at the photo, then at Margaret, his young mind processing the implications. You're the reason my dad is dead? He asked quietly. Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Tommy studied her face for a long moment, then surprised her completely. Dad always said protecting people was the most important part of being a cop. He wouldn't want me to blame you for doing your job. The boy's forgiveness, offered so simply and completely, broke something inside Margaret that had been frozen for 3 years. The next morning, Margaret called every contact she still had in the department. What she discovered made her ashamed to have ever worn the badge. Carlos's family had fallen through every crack in the system, ignored and forgotten, while bureaucrats protected themselves with paperwork. Margaret spent the night making phone calls and sending emails, using every connection she'd built over 35 years in law enforcement. What she discovered made her sick with shame and fury. Carlos's death benefits had been delayed, not by accident, but by a clerical error that no one had bothered to fix. His widow's requests for help had been shuffled between departments until she'd given up. His son's placement in foster care had been mishandled, and when he'd aged out of the system at 12, no one had followed up. The Metropolitan Police Department had utterly failed the family of a hero. The next morning, Margaret made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. She was going back to the police station not as a bitter ex-chief in a wheelchair, but as someone seeking justice for the son of the finest officer she'd ever known. Tommy, she said, as he helped her into her specially modified van. We're going to fix this. All of it. The boy looked at her with hope tempered by years of disappointment. How? Margaret's smile was grim and determined. Your father taught me that sometimes you have to fight the system to make it work. Today, we're going to war. The Metropolitan Police Department hadn't seen Margaret Thompson in 3 years, not since her retirement ceremony where she'd been wheeled on stage to receive recognition for her service. As she entered the building with Tommy beside her, conversation stopped and heads turned. Captain Rodriguez, who had served under Margaret for 15 years, approached with obvious discomfort. "Chief Thompson, this is unexpected. What can we do for you?" Margaret's voice carried the authority that had once commanded an entire force. "Captain, I'd like you to meet Tommy Martinez, son of Detective Carlos Martinez, who died in the line of duty 3 years ago protecting me." The color drained from Rodriguez's face as he looked at the boy standing beside Margaret's wheelchair. You forgot him," Margaret said simply. "You all forgot him." Margaret Thompson had spent 3 years believing she was broken, but seeing Tommy's courage and dignity reminded her who she really was. As she stood from her wheelchair for the first time since the accident, supported by pure determination and righteous anger, she knew some fights were worth any sacrifice. Word spread quickly through the department. Officers who remembered Carlos Martinez came to see his son, their faces showing a mixture of shame and recognition. This boy had his father's eyes, his father's dignity, his father's quiet strength. Commissioner Williams, who had replaced Margaret as chief, arrived within an hour. "Margaret, I had no idea. If we'd known, you should have known," Margaret replied, her voice steel wrapped in ice. "This department failed the family of a hero. Tommy Martinez has been living on the streets while you all forgot his father's sacrifice." She gestured to the memorial wall where Carlos's name was engraved among other fallen officers. "Detective Carlos Martinez died protecting his chief. His son has been surviving alone while his death benefit sat in bureaucratic limbo for 3 years." The assembled officers looked ashamed, as they should. They'd failed one of their own in the most fundamental way possible. Margaret placed her hands on the arms of her wheelchair and, with tremendous effort fueled by determination and rage, pushed herself to standing. Tommy moved quickly to support her, and together they faced the department that had abandoned him. "Commissioner Williams," Margaret said, her voice carrying across the silent room, "Tommy Martinez is going home with me today. You're going to expedite his father's death benefits immediately. You're going to establish a fund to ensure this never happens to another officer's family." She paused, looking around the room at faces she'd once commanded with respect and affection. "And you're going to remember that when we take an oath to serve and protect, that includes protecting the families of those who die in service." Commissioner Williams nodded quickly. "Of course, Margaret. Whatever you need." "What I need," Margaret replied, "is for this department to remember what honor means." 6 months later, Tommy Martinez sat at the kitchen table in Margaret Thompson's house, now legally his home through adoption, working on homework while Margaret reviewed case files. As a consulting detective for the department's cold case unit, the garden outside was immaculate, tended by both of them together. Margaret had regained enough strength to walk short distances with the cane, motivated by the daily reminder that some things were worth fighting for. Tommy looked up from his math homework. "Margaret, why did you decide to adopt me? You could have just helped me get the benefits and found me a family." Margaret set down her files and looked at the boy who had brought purpose back to her life. "Because your father saved my life, and you saved my soul. That makes us family." She gestured to the photos on the wall. Carlos in his uniform, the 3 of them at Tommy's first Little League game that spring. Margaret receiving her consulting detective credentials with Tommy proudly beside her. "Besides," she added, with a smile, "every good cop needs a partner. Your father was mine for 15 years. Now, you're my partner in making sure the department never forgets what it means to take care of its own." Tommy grinned, the expression transforming his face from the serious, two-year-old child she'd met in the rain to the happy 12-year-old he deserved to be. "Does this mean you'll teach me to be a detective when I grow up?" Margaret's laugh was warm and genuine for the first time in years. "Son, you've already learned the most important lesson. Never give up on doing what's right, even when the system fails you." As evening settled over their house, Margaret reflected on the strange turns life could take. 3 years ago, she'd thought Carlos's death had ended her career and her purpose. She'd never imagined that his son would be the one to give both back to her. Tommy had inherited more than his father's eyes and stubborn determination. He'd inherited Carlos's sense of duty, his protective instincts, and his unshakable belief that people should take care of each other. In saving Tommy from the streets and the system's failures, Margaret had discovered that she wasn't as broken as she believed. Some injuries heal through purpose, and some purposes come disguised as hungry children who refuse to give up. the Martinez family legacy lived on not just in death benefits and memorial plaques, but in the daily choice to help others, to fight for justice, and to remember that being a hero isn't about the badge you wear, but about the courage you show when no one is watching. Detective Carlos Martinez had died protecting his chief. His son had saved her in return, proving that some debts of honor span generations, and some families are built not by blood, but by shared commitment to doing what's right. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave your city in the comments as well. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. And what about you? Have you ever encountered such an event or situation? Write in the comments. We would like to hear your story.